remote, but not out of touch. Prepare yourself to go against the grain. We have another good show for you today. In the first hour, we'll be discussing the economic recovery in China and South Korea after the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also be asking the question, rich for what? Why have all of this wealth? We can project power, nuclear subs all across the world, and yet we can't get the basic protective equipment, masks, and ventilators that are sufficient during a crisis. Money for what reason? In the second hour, we're going to get into some of the domestic politics with the presidential primary that is still trucking along. The big story on Joe Biden's sexual assault has me feeling some kind of way, a little bit surprised actually. Print media has picked up this story, but mainstream media, not so much. The fact that a credible story can get buried in this way, what does it say about the ultimate results of the MeToo movement? Not to say that MeToo didn't bring any visibility, they absolutely did that, including some degree of a safe space for people discussing issues of sexual assault. But Democrats no longer seem to care. It is funny how that works. We're also going to be discussing the poll that sent a shiver down the back of every God-fearing, kick-the-poor centrist in the Democratic Party. ABC News did a breakdown regarding the enthusiasm to Biden supporters versus Trump supporters. Let's just say if your objective is for Joe Biden to win, you're going to hate that particular segment. Also, be sure to stay tuned for our weekly takedown of Sunday afternoon talking heads on Miss the Press. I think that's one of Bob's favorite segments and probably one of our funniest. But first, it is imperative that we start here. The United States media has come to the conclusion that the presidential election is over. No one told Bernie Sanders that, as he had every intention of showing up to the next Democratic debate. Now, that said, assuming they can convince Joe Biden to show up, there is still a bit less than a month before the next debate. And unfortunately for Sanders, and I would even go so far as to say by extension, America itself, his impact in regards to media has decreased with his profile in the race. Now, centrist Democrats may rejoice at this news, but be careful what you wish for. Politics is not always untethered from reality, and this is one of those occasions where it is not. Our political actors actually need to get things accomplished. The country is literally in the middle of a pandemic, and the person who's seen as a leader of the opposition representing the Democratic Party has not been able to give a consistent or coherent thought on the subject at all. And that's after he was rested for a week. Joe Biden has been giving abysmal commentary on this particular issue. Don't misunderstand this for concern for a senile man or a man that is losing his mental faculties. Actually, it's much more self-centered than that. We're in the middle of a crisis, and the leader of the opposition is clearly not up to the task, energetically, intellectually, or politically, to deal with this particular crisis and hold the government to account. Joe Biden had a conversation over the weekend with Chuck Todd, and he gives a disastrous answer to a question that should have been an easy answer, and he should have knocked it out of the park. Let's hear the question from Chuck Todd.
You know, your campaign put out in a critique of President Trump and says if he doesn't do these things, you know, he could cost lives. Do you think there is blood on the president's hands, considering the slow response, or is that too harsh of a criticism?
I think that's a little too harsh. I think what's happening is the failure to, as I watched a prelim to your show where someone said that, used the phrase that the president just thinks out loud.
I don't know what that means. And why would you even give Trump the benefit of the doubt on something like that? Apparently, Chuck Todd can get a horse to the water, but can't get Joe Biden to drink. What is Joe Biden talking about here? In the same way I get angry for Sanders on issues of weakness, I find myself feeling the same way here. You've decided to run for an office you're clearly not qualified to occupy. Fine. The deadened expectations of the party got people believing that you're the best that they can do. You're the best that America would accept. That is massively dispiriting, but fine. It's what we got. And regardless of the fact that you're never going to get my vote, I still want somebody to be able to hold the government to account. especially in the middle of a crisis? The answer is utterly disastrous. Not only is it bad politics, it's also plainly not true. Trump does have blood on his hands, and you should be able to say that it is empirically true. Thomas, Book of Politics, page 3, section 2, determine your objective. In pursuit of that objective, your action should follow with reason and should be proportional and defensible up until the points of your point of view. Now, what I mean by that is it is very clear by all accounts, meaning from people who are looking at this, from people who are making decisions on what we should and shouldn't be doing and what the decisions that we're taking that is causing lives lost, it is clear that what Donald Trump has did has lost lives. Trump has had 3 months lead time. They were getting briefings back in January. We know what they said in those briefings because the senators came out of those briefings and sold their stock. They fully understood what was about to befall this country. Trump, on the other hand, also came out and instead of warning, instead of taking action, instead of closing certain locations and making sure we had the supplies that we needed, Trump played politics and downplayed the virus. Let's hear the clip of Trump downplaying this virus.
The coronavirus.
This is their new hoax.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China.
One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
When you have 15 people, and within a couple of days it's going to be down to close to zero, we really think we've done a great job in keeping it down to a minimum.
I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this ad.
Just so we're clear, 3 months lead time. On the 10th, we had 1,000 people infected with the virus. On the 11th, 1,267. On the 12th, 1,645. 13th, 2,204. 14th, 2,824. Let's skip a few days. On the 19th, 1,227. On the 23rd, 42,663. On the 25th, 65,273. On the 28th, 121,176. Now, 145,099. Don't tell me Trump doesn't have blood on his hands. It didn't have to be this way. Right now, the United States is literally the epicenter of the virus, meaning from the standpoint of the total number of cases, China has 3 times our population. And even if you want to make the argument that the number of cases in China is more than what they said it is, doesn't matter. It's still bad here, and it is a perfect storm here. To be clear, it didn't have to be this way, which is kind of my point. Trump could have called for a shutdown earlier. Trump should have compelled companies to produce the supplies, the ventilators, and all of these other items that we needed, that we knew we were going to need, that you could look around the world and see that we were going to need, and that he never did. And even now, the Defense Production Act still has not been implemented. Trump pushed through a corporate bailout. And yes, I understood the Democrats went in right along with him. But let's just be very clear. 4.5 trillion of that is going to go effectively to companies and businesses. But that didn't include anything to ensure that workers were going to be able to get extra income. There wasn't anything, provisions to protect individuals from evictions, foreclosures, forbearance. It wasn't anything to ensure guaranteed time off in case of illness. This bill missed all sorts of things dealing with the real material concerns of the various people in the various countries. No money for state and local governments, no additional SNAP funds, no OSHA language to protect workers, no expanded emergency leave provisions. Direct payments won't be available in some cases for months. No treatment or no money for the treatment of coronavirus. I hope you understand what I mean, the point that I'm making here. Trump had options. He was able to bring a massive ton of money. But what he didn't do with that massive ton of money was to ensure that the various states and the various counties and the various communities in this particular country had the things that they need to get from point A to point B. In fact, after dropping $4.5 trillion or $2 trillion that's going to be capitalized in $4.5 trillion, when asked about ventilators, listen to what Trump said. Listen to the clip of Trump talking about ventilators and whining that the people keep complaining about wanting to breathe.
But I have a feeling that a lot of the numbers that are being said in some areas are just bigger than they're going to be. I don't believe you need 40,000 or 30,000 ventilators. You know, you go into major hospitals sometimes, they'll have 2 ventilators, and now all of a sudden they're saying, can we order 30,000 ventilators? So, look, it's a very bad situation. We haven't seen anything like it. But the end result is we got to get back to work, and I think we can start by opening up certain parts of the country, you know, Farm Belt, certain parts of the Midwest, other places, but
CNN, Dr. Fauci said he believes that New York's Governor Cuomo actually needs those 30,000 ventilators. Also, on top of that, if you notice, Trump was trying to send people back to work earlier. It is true that he expanded that for 30 days, but for the longest time, he had been trying to send people back far earlier than what they recommended. And after everything, keep in mind, 30,000 ventilators. Trump just dropped $2 trillion, 30,000 ventilators. And now he attacks the governors. Let's hear this clip with Trump going after the governors.
Can you be specific? What more in this time of
Well, I think we've done a great job for the state of Washington, and I think the governor, who's a failed presidential candidate, as you know, he leveled out at 0 in the polls. Michigan, all she does is she has no idea what's going on, and all she does is say, oh, it's the federal government's fault. And we've taken such great care of Michigan.
Is what more specifically do you want the governor of Washington?
All I want them to do, very simple. I want them to be appreciative. I don't want them to say things that aren't true. I want them to be appreciative. Governors have been really good, except for a couple. And with them, it's just political. I think they should be appreciative because, you know what, when they're not appreciative to me, they're not appreciative to the Army Corps, they're not appreciative to FEMA. It's not right. I mean, Mike Pence, I don't think he sleeps anymore. These are people that should be appreciated. He calls all the governors. I tell him, I mean, I'm a different type of person. I say, Mike, don't call the governor of Washington. You're wasting your time with him. Don't call the woman in Michigan. It doesn't make any difference what happens.
The governor of Washington?
No, you know what I say? If they don't treat you right, I don't call.
If they don't treat you right, I don't call. I mean, those governors are just angry and mad that the president is not returning their call. You should hear what Cuomo was saying, that Trump wasn't returning his call. We need this many ventilators. We need this many masks. We need this much protective gear. New York is not the only place that needs those items. Trump could have compelled companies to build those items. He didn't do that. In World War II, during a wartime situation, the government was able to compel companies to build items out that they needed for a war. And Trump coming with this language that we're at a war, okay, then you should act as such. Not so much. If somebody asks you the question, does Donald Trump have blood on his hands? Empirically, that answer is yes, because Donald Trump could have taken provocative actions to prevent this crisis from getting to be this bad, especially when it was very clear that it was going to come down to this. Joe Biden is not up to the task of having this fight. For Joe Biden to make this argument that he's going to beat Trump like a drum, I don't even know if Joe Biden can beat a drum for any amount of sustained time, let alone trying to take down Donald Trump. This is a pandemic. And if you can't make your argument as to why you're the person and not Trump, you are literally right now in a polling tie with Donald Trump on the issue of who will handle the virus better. And I've just made the argument that Trump has blood on his hands, and you can't get past that argument. Like, I hope you understand what I mean. Biden is not your guy. Biden is not up to this task. And that answer from Chuck Todd was utterly disastrous. Bob, I know how much you love Chuck Todd. I know that's your favorite guy. This answer from Joe Biden is extremely telling because this should have been the moment where Joe Biden said, yes, he has blood on his hands and plow into Trump. He was given the opportunity. Chuck Todd was teeing him up for it. Joe Biden is not up for this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just the mere fact that after Chuck Todd asked the question, the guy that's holding Trump accountable and the rest of the government that goes out there every Sunday and basically every night on MSNBC and says, well, I have all the answers. We'll hold them to account. And Chuck Todd backs off the question. He goes, oh, I shouldn't even ask that. And that's what toothless media we have in this country that don't actually hold politicians accountable in real ways. I mean, it's these kind of soft kid glove kind of questions that how dare he say that U.S. imperialism has killed millions of people around the world over the last decades. Can't ask those questions. Those are kind of the off-limit questions. And so to ask, is a president actually complicit in the death of people? That's not a question you can ask in American politics and media. And then for me, that's what shines through, is that that's not just a now moment of a crisis moment. That's always been in American politics. And that's why it's so disgusting, why you don't see much leadership change despite the parties changing. You still have relatively kind of the same spectrum of conversation and questioning of these elected officials. Jamarl, I was also really impressed with the idea that Trump is kind of pulling the mask off of it all. And that's what people said. Have Trump in there, he'll tell you the truth, and not taking calls from certain states, pitting people against one another. I think that's long-time American politics for sure. And we're just seeing it in a very blunt and honest and open way. Jamarl, we have a full show. I'm really excited to get into it. We're joined by Emmanuel Pastriche right after the break here. We're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.